What happens when Hollywood's biggest action star meets late-night television's most controversial host in a collision that nobody saw coming? You won't believe what unfolds when Tom Cruise sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a simple promotional interview, only to spiral into one of the most explosive confrontations ever captured on live television. The tension that erupted last night has sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry, and what you're about to witness will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about celebrity interviews. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in a battle of egos that ended with one of them storming off the set. The atmosphere inside the Jimmy Kimmel live studio was electric as Tom Cruise made his entrance to thunderous applause. Dressed in his signature all-black ensemble, the Mission Impossible star flashed his megawatt smile and worked the crowd like the consummate professional he's always been. But beneath the surface, something felt different. The usual easy rapport between guest and host seemed strained from the moment Cruise settled into the guest chair. Kimmel opened with his typical brand of humor, but there was an edge to his delivery that veteran viewers immediately picked up on. "Tom Cruise, everybody! The man who does his own stunts because apparently insurance companies love him," Kimmel quipped, earning scattered laughs from the audience. Cruise's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, a micro-expression that spoke volumes about what was brewing beneath the Hollywood veneer. "Always great to be here, Jimmy," Cruise responded, but his voice carried a tension that hadn't been there in previous appearances. His hands, usually animated and expressive, remained clasped tightly in his lap. The body language experts, watching at home, were already taking notes. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, adopting that familiar pose that signals he's about to dig deeper. "So, Tom, I have to ask about something that's been making headlines. There are reports that you've been, let's say, very hands-on with your recent film productions. Some crew members have described working conditions as intense." The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Cruise's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media-trained response kicked in immediately. "Jimmy, I think there might be some misunderstanding about what really happened on set. My job is to deliver the best possible product for the fans, and that sometimes means being passionate about every detail." But Kimmel wasn't backing down. In fact, he seemed to be relishing the discomfort he was creating. Passionate is one word for it, but when crew members are filing complaints about hostile work environments, that goes beyond passion, doesn't it? The studio audience, initially buzzing with excitement, began to sense the shift in energy. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they'd come to expect. The cameras captured every nuance as Cruise's composure began to show its first real cracks. "I think you're mischaracterizing the situation, Jimmy," Cruise said, his voice dropping to a lower register, a warning sign that anyone who knew him would recognize. "These are professional film sets with the highest standards in the industry. If that's too intense for some people, maybe they're in the wrong business." Kimmel's response came with a smirk that would later be dissected frame by frame across social media. "Too intense? Tom, we're talking about grown professionals walking off your set in tears. That's not about professional standards. That's about basic human decency." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Cruise's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The carefully constructed mask of Hollywood charm slipped, revealing something much more raw underneath. His voice, when he spoke again, carried a dangerous quiet that made the studio audience hold its collective breath. "Jimmy, I think you need to be very careful about the accusations you're making on national television," Cruise said, each word measured and deliberate. "You're talking about things you know nothing about based on gossip and tabloid rumors." The host's response would prove to be the spark that ignited everything that followed. Kimmel leaned forward, his own mask of comedic friendliness dropping away to reveal something much more calculating. "Tom, I'm not making accusations. I'm asking questions based on documented reports from multiple sources. Unless you're saying all these people are lying, that single word, lying, seemed to trigger something primal in Cruz. His hands unclenched for the first time since sitting down, not in relaxation, but in preparation. The energy in the room shifted so dramatically that even the production crew behind the cameras began to take notice. "You know what, Jimmy?" Cruz said, his voice now carrying an edge that cut through the studio like a blade. "I've been doing this for over 40 years. I've worked with the best directors, the best crews, the best actors in this business, and I've never had anyone question my professionalism or my treatment of the people I work with." But Kimmel seemed to be feeding off the tension, pushing harder instead of backing down. "Well, there's a first time for everything, right? Maybe it's time to examine whether the Tom Cruise brand of perfectionism has crossed some lines." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the band seemed to sense that something unprecedented was happening. This wasn't just a difficult interview anymore, it was becoming something much more dangerous. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every second of what was rapidly becoming one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history. And as both men stared at each other across the desk, it became clear that this confrontation was only just beginning. The stare-down lasted what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. Finally, Cruz broke the silence, his voice now stripped of any pretense of Hollywood diplomacy. "You know what your problem is, Jimmy? You sit behind this desk every night throwing stones at people who are actually out there creating something meaningful? When's the last time you put yourself on the line for your craft?" Kimmel's laugh was sharp and humorless. "My craft? Tom, my craft is asking the questions that need to be asked. And right now the question is whether you've become so insulated by yes men that you can't handle basic accountability." The word accountability seemed to trigger something even deeper in Cruz. He shifted forward in his chair, no longer the relaxed guest, but a coiled spring ready to unleash. "Accountability? Let me tell you about accountability, Jimmy. I've been accountable for every single film I've made, every stunt I've performed, every dollar invested in my projects. I don't hide behind writers and producers and network executives. I put my name, my reputation, my body on the line every single day. And apparently your crew's well-being too," Kimmel shot back without missing a beat. The audience was now completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something that went far beyond typical late-night television. This was personal, and it was getting ugly fast. Cruz's composure cracked further. "You want to talk about well-being? Let's talk about what you do to people, Jimmy. How many guests have you humiliated on this show? How many careers have you tried to damage with your so-called comedy? At least when I demand excellence, it's in service of something greater than myself." The accusation hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Kimmel's face flushed, and for the first time in the interview, he looked genuinely rattled. That's rich coming from someone who allegedly made an assistant cry just for bringing the wrong coffee to set. "Allegedly," Cruz repeated, his voice now dripping with contempt. "There's that word again. You know what's not alleged, Jimmy? The fact that you've built your entire career on tearing other people down. That's not entertainment. That's exploitation." The host's mask finally slipped completely. Gone was the jovial late-night personality, replaced by something much more vindictive. "At least I don't pretend to be some kind of saint while treating people like garbage behind closed doors. You want to talk about exploitation? Let's talk about how you've manipulated your public image for decades while being a tyrant to everyone around you." That was the moment everything changed. Cruz's entire body language shifted from defensive to offensive. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout could have. "You just crossed a line, Jimmy. A big one." The studio fell into complete silence. Even the band members were frozen, unsure. whether to intervene or simply bear witness to what was unfolding. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of what was rapidly becoming television history. "What line is that, Tom?" Kimmel challenged, his own voice rising to match. "The intensity. The line where we finally call out Hollywood's biggest hypocrite? Where we stop pretending that your charm offensive makes up for the trail of broken people you've left behind." Cruise stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward with the force of his movement. The sudden action sent a ripple of tension through the entire studio. Security personnel, previously invisible in the shadows, began to shift positions, ready to intervene if necessary. "You know what, Jimmy? I've had enough of this ambush masquerading as an interview," Cruise said, his voice now carrying the full force of decades of suppressed frustration. "You invited me here under false pretenses, and now you're trying to destroy my reputation, based on tabloid gossip and anonymous sources." Kimmel remained seated but matched Cruise's intensity. "I invited you here to have an honest conversation about serious allegations. If you can't handle that, maybe that says more about you than it does about me." "Serious allegations?" Cruise's laugh was bitter and sharp. "These aren't serious allegations, Jimmy. This is a hit job. And the fact that you're too cowardly to admit it makes you even more pathetic than I thought." The insult landed like a physical blow. Kimmel's face darkened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a venom that shocked even the most cynical observers. Pathetic? Coming from someone who's so desperate to control every narrative that he can't function when faced with legitimate criticism? "You're not a perfectionist, Tom. You're a narcissist who's finally being called out." The word narcissist seemed to flip a switch in Cruise. His hands began to tremble, not with fear, but with barely contained rage. "That's it," he said, his voice now deadly quiet again. "We're done here." But Kimmel wasn't finished. Perhaps, sensing that he'd finally gotten under the actor's skin, he pushed even harder. "Oh, we're done when I say we're done. This is my show, Tom. My house. And in my house, we don't run away from uncomfortable truths." The challenge was unmistakable, and Cruise's response was immediate and explosive. "Your house!" he roared, his voice finally breaking free from all constraints. "Your house is built on the misery of others. You're a parasitic bottom feeder who gets off on humiliating people for the entertainment of mouth breathers." The studio erupted. Audience members gasped audibly, some rising from their seats in shock. The band members looked at each other in disbelief. This had gone far beyond anything anyone had ever witnessed on live television. But the confrontation was far from over, and as both men faced each other in mutual fury, it became clear that someone was about to say something that would make everything that had come before seem like polite conversation. Kimmel rose from his desk, abandoning any pretense of maintaining host decorum. The smile that had been his trademark for years was completely gone, replaced by a sneer of pure contempt. "You know what, Tom? Let's talk about the real reason you're so defensive. It's not about protecting your reputation. It's about protecting your ego. Because deep down, you know that everything I'm saying is true." The accusation hit like a nuclear bomb. Cruise's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, rage, and something that looked almost like pain. When he spoke, his voice was barely controlled fury. "You want the truth, Jimmy? Here's the truth. I've dedicated my entire life to this craft. I've sacrificed everything, my privacy, my relationships, my body, to give audiences something extraordinary. And you? You're a failed comedian who found a way to make money by mocking people better than you." The studio was now in complete chaos. Audience members were on their feet, some filming with their phones despite security's attempts to maintain order. The band had stopped pretending to play, their instruments forgotten as they watched the unprecedented meltdown unfold. Kimmel's response was immediate and brutal. "Failed comedian? At least I don't have to jump off buildings to get people to pay attention to me. At least I don't have to surround myself with Scientology cultists to feel important. The mention of Scientology was like throwing gasoline on an already raging fire. Cruz's entire body went rigid, his face flushing red with an anger so intense it seemed to radiate heat. "Don't you dare bring that into this," he snarled, pointing an accusatory finger at Kimmel. "Don't you dare use my faith as a weapon against me." But Kimmel had tasted blood, and he wasn't backing down. "Faith? Is that what we're calling it now? Tom, you're a puppet dancing to the tune of a science fiction writer's fever dream, and you're so brainwashed you can't even see it." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For a moment, Cruz seemed to deflate, as if the weight of the accusation had physically struck him. But then something shifted, and when he looked up, his eyes held a coldness that was genuinely frightening. "You know what, Jimmy?" Cruz said, his voice now eerily calm. "I've been in this business long enough to recognize jealousy when I see it. You're jealous of my success, my longevity, my ability to connect with audiences in ways you never could. And because you can't measure up, you resort to cheap shots and personal attacks." Kimmel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jealous? Of what? Your ability to alienate everyone around you? Your talent for making people afraid to tell you the truth? Tom, you're not a movie star anymore. You're a cautionary tale." The insult seemed to break something fundamental in Cruz. His composure, which had been cracking throughout the interview, finally shattered completely. "A cautionary tale?" he roared, his voice echoing through the studio. "I'm a cautionary tale? You're a parasite who feeds off other people's misery. You're everything that's wrong with this industry." Security personnel began moving closer, sensing that the situation was spiraling completely out of control. The studio audience was now a mixture of shocked silence and excited murmurs, everyone realizing they were witnessing something that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. Kimmel, perhaps realizing he had pushed too far, attempted to regain some semblance of control. "Tom, maybe we should take a break and—" "No!" Cruz interrupted, his voice cracking with emotion. "No breaks. You wanted to humiliate me on national television? You wanted to destroy my reputation? Then let's finish this right now." The actor began pacing behind his chair like a caged animal, his hands gesturing wildly as decades of suppressed frustration poured out. "You think you know me? You think you understand what it takes to do what I do? I've been carrying this industry on my back for 40 years, while people like you sit in the cheap seats and throw stones." Kimmel's face was now flushed with his own anger. "Carrying the industry? Tom, you're delusional. You're a relic from a bygone era who can't accept that the world has moved on without you." That was the final straw. Cruz stopped pacing and fixed Kimmel with a stare that could have melted steel. "You know what? I'm done. I'm done with this pathetic excuse for an interview. I'm done with your two-bit psychology, and I'm done with you." He turned toward the audience, his voice carrying across the studio with the projection of a trained performer. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what passes for entertainment in Hollywood today. A washed-up comedian attacking a guest who came here in good faith. This isn't journalism. It's a public execution." Kimmel stood up behind his desk, pointing at Cruz. "Don't you dare turn this around. You came on my show and—" "Your show?" Cruz whirled around, his eyes blazing. "This isn't a show, Jimmy. This is a circus, and you're the head clown." The insult seemed to break Kimmel's last restraint. "Get out!" he shouted, his voice cracking with rage. "Get out of my studio!" Cruz's smile was terrifying in its coldness. "With pleasure," he said, straightening his jacket with exaggerated care. "But let me leave you with something to think about, Jimmy. When this airs, when people see what you really are, your career will be over. Not because of anything I did, but because you showed everyone your true face." He began walking toward the exit, but paused at the edge of the stage. "Oh, and Jimmy? Good luck explaining this to your network executives. Something tells me they're not going to be happy about you destroying their relationship with every major talent agency in Hollywood." With that, Tom Cruise walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live set, leaving behind a studio in complete chaos. The audience was on their feet, some cheering, others booing, most simply stunned by what they had witnessed. Kimmel stood behind his desk, his face a mask of rage and something that might have been fear. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing Kimmel's attempts to regain composure, before finally cutting to an emergency commercial break. But the damage was done. In the span of one explosive interview, both men had revealed sides of themselves that would change their public personas forever. The confrontation was over, but its effects would ripple through Hollywood and beyond for years to come. It was a night that would be remembered as the moment when the carefully constructed facades of celebrity culture finally cracked, revealing the raw, ugly truth beneath the glamorous surface.